So today is about, very briefly, obviously the content goes much deeper and much more thoughtfully through this content for you to definitely go through. So with that said, of kind of what we know about feature and outcome based teams, what Heidi's told you about kind of like the experience for customers and for the business at Typeform, which way would you go here? Would you go more of a feature based team approach or an outcome based team approach? Tell us a little bit more in the thread about your rationale, kind of like how you would organize the team and why. So I think there's a good clarifying question here, and how do you like, maybe you can answer this in a second on a goal for a feature-based org, what that would look like. But for other Q&A, we're going to get to Q&A in about half an hour, and submitting your question then is actually most beneficial to you. It will get the most upvotes and will actually get answered. So like I encourage you to ask those types of questions in about half an hour. But to clarify on like kind of a feature-based org, Heidi, what would that potentially look like? You had some feature-based orgs kind of coming into this at Typeform. What did that look like?
Feature-based. So Typeform, the Typeform sort of core product experience, as I mentioned, it's a form builder, and and there's a couple core features that you really can't get around, right? That are absolutely must-haves for, to be able to build a form and get results. So form builder being one, right? You can't have a form without a form builder, and someone will always need to, that is durable, right? So there's some features in there that are durable and have must work, and you're kind of never done. The form builder team is one, results is another one. So a results area where the customer can access those results, do something with those results. So those were core feature areas that are just must-haves, and also areas that we get sort of the most customer feedback, requests. If you ask the customer, like, what is this product comprised of, they're going to mention those two things.
Can you give an example of, like, let's say the builder here, like what would be a great goal for that, which existed as a feature-based team?
Yeah. I did go through this exercise of kind of mapping, trying to figure out, like, okay, the builder, like, how do we measure success? And it's a little bit indirect, but a couple things. One was activation. So we defined activation at Typeform as meaning that the customer had published a form and gotten 5 responses. So there's a setup of just building a form. Publishing that form and actually getting responses means like the customer has gotten some value out of the product, right? So for that builder team, we made activation the kind of their primary outcome. And they had more responsibility than that, right? Because people come back and build multiple forms. They might go change forms, like, there's a lot more they do. But that sort of initial form success was the most critical thing.
Got it. I think it's good to know that, like, when people think feature teams, they think they might not have any kind of guidance on what their goal state is, what their outcome is. So it's good to know that, like, for example, the builder team was kind of mainly judged here on how do we drive something just outside the build, right? The activation of like actually getting results. That's an interesting take. And I think net a positive one. So here in the poll, we have a strongly weighted to outcomes response, 30-4. So a bunch of I think product leaders that have like tattoos that says like outcomes over outputs, which I agree, obviously, but in this case, like, I think it's interesting to think about where a team can be actually most empowered as a feature-based team versus outcome. I'm trying I'm reading through the responses, and I think there's a lot of good ones saying like the features are important, but like outcomes is what's going to kind of move us forward. So I'm reading a lot of things to that point, and that outcomes as product market fit is fairly clear. So it's just like, we know what features to build, so now let's go figure out how to maximize outcomes. Let's talk, Heidi, about your approach. I think you kind of had a bit of a hybrid approach here. Tell us a little bit more about what you wrestled with in making this decision.
Yeah, I will say my answer was yes. And partially it was, I've mentioned the situation when I joined where we had these new growth teams, we had these horizon teams, right? And my job was, ostensibly primarily core, but I realized I had to design core and the whole organization kind of together to make sense. And product, so core product, I chose to keep as feature based because, and I was sort of alluding to this, there were a couple core feature areas that were simply fundamental product value. There is no product without those things. And then within those things, we had in our metrics exercise, we had identified a few driver metrics that were good levers for those feature teams to focus on. And those were things that might change over time. For instance, form builder. So long as we are a form building company, we're going to have a form builder of some kind, but what's in there could change over time. And we had found that logic and personalization within the form builder, if customers use logic, which might be calculations or things like that, or personalization, they could pull in data from a CRM or something like that to be able to personalize the experience or ask for a name up front and then use that data later in the form, right? So if they use those kinds of tools, they were much more likely to retain. And I'll say at the outset too, like retention was our big challenge. We did an analysis and it was like retention was really it. So they had a couple of very clear levers within the builder team of drive adoption and usage of personalization. We had a couple strong hypotheses of additional kind of feature usage that we were pretty sure would drive retention. A couple new things. One was branding. That if the customer, we could get the customer to add their logo and branding to the forms, they were more likely to retain. I learned that one at GoDaddy. So they had a couple really clear levers to pull that laddered very directly up to those outcome metrics that we cared about. So we kept them feature based, but their mission was very much about moving these downstream metrics. We also already had these growth teams that were already outcome based. And so we kept that and we ended up with a little bit of a matrix where we had the feature crews clearly responsible for quality, bugs, user experience, right, within those features. That was a big differentiator for us. And we also had these horizontal teams. So one big issue one big change was, okay, I realized those growth teams weren't really working with the product teams at all. So, and they were having sort of limited impact